Hey everyone, welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Ana Kasparian, and we have a great show ahead for you guys. In fact, we are going to dedicate our main discussion on the issue of bizarre animal sex. Now, it sounds a little salacious, but the reality is it's really interesting because, of course, it has to do with evolution and how these animals evolved to engage in bizarre sex and what the benefits are of the type of sex that they get involved in. So we'll get into that. Cara Santa Maria is a favorite of ours here at TYT, a former neuroscientist who currently drops science on a TV audience as a producer and co-host of Take Part Live on Pivot TV. Cara, thank you for coming back to the program.
Thank you for having me as always.
Peter Nonacs is an evolutionary and behavioral ecology professor at UCLA whose research includes the study of sexual selection, which of course is very relevant for the topic at hand today, cooperation and social behavior. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, happy Darwin Day.
Thank you. And Chris Ryan is the co-author of the New York Times best-selling Sex at Dawn, as well as the host of the Tangentially Speaking podcast, soon to be posting an episode with a uniquely dynamic, charismatic, and riveting interview subject. Myself. Yeah. By the way, I don't write the intros to everyone, so I would not refer to myself as unique and riveting, but I hope it went well.
I think that was my language.
You are. I would refer to you as that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I felt riveted afterwards. I'll say that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty in-depth conversation about some personal stuff on my
Well,
behalf,
I love it when, this probably happens with you as well, when you're interviewing someone. I love it when afterwards they say, I can't believe I said those things. I shared that, it got pretty personal.
It got very personal. I'm actually pretty comfortable sharing my personal life with people. I mean, not everything, but some stuff. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about animalistic urges and bizarre animal sex. We're not referring to furries in this case. We're talking about actual animals that have evolved to have very, very bizarre sex. And there is obviously a tie to evolution there, and we'll discuss that with our researchers and scientists, so I'm looking forward to that. But before we get to it, I want to show you one quick example of bizarre animal sex, and it involves ducks. That is a duck penis.
Oh, yeah.
Ugh. So what you just saw there was a duck's penis, and it has a corkscrew shape, and there are benefits to that, and we'll get to why that's beneficial to that species in just a second. But before we do, I wanted to share what my favorite animal sex knowledge is, right? And that has to do with bonobos. Bonobos are fascinating because they're so similar to humans in terms of the way that they mate. But what I love is that when female bonobos are having sex with a very dominant male bonobo, they like to do so as loudly as possible to make sure that the community knows, hey, I'm having sex with a big guy on campus, right? So I think that's really, really fascinating. But first question is actually going to go to Peter. I want you to comment on the duck video that we just saw right now. Why is that an advantage for the species?
Well, it's an advantage for the male duck because that's the way you get the sperm to the egg in the female duck. So the female duck has her reproductive tract that requires a penis that long. If you had a short penis like this long, you basically wouldn't make any ducklings. So then there's this question of this evolutionary race as to, do female reproductive tracts get longer and males chase after that, or are the reproductive tracts long because the males have long penises? Which came first, the penis or the reproductive tract? So yes, for ducks it's advantageous, and it's strange because most birds actually don't really have penises. They have cloacas, and they do it very differently. So we don't really understand. I mean, the ducks understand it, but we don't really understand it all that well as to why they're doing what they're doing.
So, anytime we do any type of funding for basic scientific research, there's always a lot of hate. So like Republicans love to use the example of the corkscrew penis to say, look at this, we're spending taxpayer dollars on learning about duck penises. But it's actually really, really relevant, right? Because it gives us a better understanding of our world as a whole. What do you think about that, Cara?
Well, I mean, we share a lot of genetic similarities with ducks. We share genetic similarities, as you said, with bonobos. These animals we really understand now, their position on the tree of life, on the evolutionary tree, and the more that we can understand the way that organisms are born, live, mate, experience life, and die, I think the better that we understand ourselves. And so even at the most basic level, even if we're talking about pure science and we're talking about the joy of understanding why the world works the way that it works, downstream, it always is going to have an advantageous effect for the human species as a whole, because in learning about the universe, we are learning about ourselves.
That's a great answer. Chris, I want to ask you what your favorite bizarre animal sex is.
Well, the one that comes to mind is the sea slug, which are hermaphrodites, and they sort of cruise around on the bottom of the ocean. They have the sex organs of males and females. And when the two sea slugs encounter each other, they rise up and start butting heads, and these two little prongs come out of their heads. They start butting heads together until finally one of them, his prongs break through the skin of the other, insert sperm, and at that point, the other becomes female.
Wow. So that kind of gives new meaning to rough sex. Like that sounds pretty dirty.
Sounds like some sort of prison scenario, right? Yeah. So
traumatic insemination.
Traumatic insemination.
Wow.
And is that widespread within the animal community?
No.
Because
it's not widespread, but it is found in various species.
Right. So grasshoppers, for instance, the female grasshopper will kill the male grasshopper after they have sex.
Praying mantis.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I said grasshopper. Yeah, praying mantis does that.
Well, she will actually eat the male while they're mating, and I know that females sort of think that this part is not necessarily connected to that part, and in praying mantises that's true. So the copulatory organ happily goes on doing whatever it's doing as the head is disappearing down her gullet. So, again, I wouldn't say this is a life lesson. I mean, you wouldn't want to sort of in the middle of a sexual act say, I'm a little bit hungry. But a meal with insemination is good for praying mantis.
Is this to eliminate the male so he doesn't eat the young or something, or do you have any idea what?
No. I mean, people have looked at it as maybe it has something to do with the fact that he's providing her not only with sperm but a meal which allows her to make more eggs. So that could be one explanation.
So he's like really dispensable.
He's very dispensable.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow, we know what his purpose in life is.
Yeah,
that's intense. Yeah.
What about bees?
They don't eat each other, but in honeybees, the female goes out on mating flight, and she's going to become the queen. And she only mates once in her life. So she goes and she flies off and she looks for males. Males hovering around this big swarm, she flies through the swarm back and forth, and they mate in the air. So it has to happen very quick, very fast. And so the males, when they actually get lucky enough to latch onto the female, it's very quick and their genitals literally explode.
Oh, God. You made the noise and everything.
Yes, and you hear it. It's sort of popping away. And the males then, after their genitals explode, they sort of fall to the ground and die happily, I suppose, as happy as a drone can. And the idea, again, is that this male is going to die within a day or two anyway. And so there's no long-term future for a male honeybee. And so the fact that your genitals explode after one time, that's fine by them. And the female then mates like 14, 15, 20 times, stores the sperm for the rest of her life, which could be years and years and years, and just parcels it out as she needs it.
So she has like one huge sexual encounter, and then after that she's done.
That's
she just stored. That's fascinating.
That's it. Just one.
So her entire life is one gangbang.
Exactly.
Wow, one very violent, deadly gangbang.
Emphasis on the bang.
Yes. Cara, what about you? What's your favorite story?
I mean, I think for me, it's probably all about the anatomy. Obviously, we look at that video of duck penis, and I think it really grabs your attention. There's also a very good article written about duck penis by Ed Yong, who is one of my favorite science writers, so everybody should check that out. But duck penis is fascinating. I remember seeing a tapir penis at the zoo, and I think that really stuck with me because tapirs have a penis that some would say is kind of prehensile. It can actually move around on its own. It can sort of grab on. It's massive. It's literally a third, or I guess you would call it a fifth leg in a four-legged animal. It's so big, you kind of, if you're not looking too carefully, you might mistaken it for a leg. And I think it's interesting to see how the anatomy of different organisms evolve because of their mating style. And also, a lot of people would look at the tapir and go, that is probably the biggest dick in the animal kingdom. But truth be told, it's not. The longest penis is actually the barnacle penis.
Oh, wow.
And that's because
relative to size.
Relative to size, yes. Yeah. Obviously, it's not the longest penis. But the longest relative to size is the barnacle penis, and that's because barnacles, as we know, they're those things that stick to the bottoms of ships, they don't move to mate. So they have to have this meandering penis that can make its way into the barnacle that it has selected.
And do you know who the world's leading expert on the barnacle was?
Who? Oh,
Charles Darwin.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that was
Darwin
one of
Day.
the
Look,
things he
see that?
said.
I did that on purpose.
And
Well done.
speaking of penises, I brought a prop. you can
Oh, okay.
handle.
All right. So what am I holding right now?
Okay, well, I mean, last time I was here, you were sort of kvetching a little bit about your social life.
Was I?
And so what you're holding is called a baculum, and this
Okay.
came from a sea lion, and the common name oftentimes is called the penis bone.
The penis bone. Okay,
Right.
so this is a sea lion's penis.
Right.
Okay.
It is,
all
it is,
right.
it is within
So-
a sea lion. And again, if you want to talk evolutionarily,
Yes.
males have to be ready. And it's good to have a real bone in there because then you never need Viagra, you never need Cialis, all those
Wow.
things.
So they have like a permanent
Right.
boner.
A permanent bone. Yes.
Wow.
Most males do. Humans are among the few that don't have a baculum.
Right.
Yeah.
So why is it that humans don't have this bone in their penis, but other animals do? What is the evolutionary advantage there?
I don't know that there's a definite explanation for it. I think
Well, one might say that this is sort of cheating a little bit, right? Because you can keep this hard for as long as you need. Whereas a lot of sexual selection, really, when you think about it, is the females get what they want. So the explanation maybe is that females don't want a penis bone in humans because, you need to show that you can do it without this little extra aid. In you.
Is there a baculum in other great apes?
It's very small.
It's just very small. So you
yeah.
can kind of see the
You
evolution.
can see it disappearing.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
yes.
interesting.
So again, if a lot of male behavior, a lot of male anatomy reflects female choice.
I think to an untrained eye, when you observe mating in the animal kingdom across species, it appears from the outside to be very rapey. I think that's a good way to put it, right?
Yeah.
A lot of animal sex looks rapey.
Right. That
It's a lot
happens
of
with ducks for sure.
rear mounting
Yeah.
males. It's a lot of pinning down the female in order to keep her in place, and it doesn't always look like she's welcoming the sex.
Yeah.
And so we understand that oftentimes the female is the one who doesn't have the vibrant colors and doesn't have to put on the big display. She is the one who gets to be choosy, but then once she actually chooses to have sex, it doesn't really seem like she's that into it. Is that us anthropomorphizing the animals?
What are we going to do about consent among
Yeah.
different species?
I mean, this is
Well, a serious point. As someone who works in animal behavior, we have really tried to get away from using the term rape, because what happens in humans is probably a very different thing than what's happening in animals. Now, again, one of the explanations for many of these species is that if the female is showing resistance, fighting the male off, only the most robust and the most vibrant males are going to be able to mate with her. And so maybe it does look rapey in the sense that they're sort of fighting, but it's a way the females are saying, well, if you're not good enough to pin me down, to hold me down, then I don't want your sperm. And,
That's really interesting.
And that, again, that should not, and I'm going to be very firm here, that should not be taken into human ideas of this is the way sex happens. This is the way sex happens, say, in bees or ants or something like that. But it's very different from what
But there are male displays of fitness among humans,
Oh, yes.
right? Whether it's a Rolex
Yes.
watch or you're captain
Yes.
of the football team. We might also mention while we're on the subject that bonobos are very interesting in that no bonobo has ever been witnessed to rape a female bonobo. It's never been seen in captivity or in the wild.
And they also have face-to-face sex, right? And
right.
like no other
And
species
oral
do
sex
that.
as well.
Yeah, they have every kind of sex you can think of in every combination other than mother-son.
Well, dolphins will have blowhole sex, which
Yeah.
is not possible for bonobos.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. Okay,
yeah.
all right. But if you got a bonobo and a dolphin, you have no idea what that. Let's just say.
So to buttress off Cara's point about the nature of sex and how it seems like it's forced upon the females, I'm really curious how many species, or can you think of other species that enjoy sex similar to how humans enjoy sex? So I'm assuming
Certainly
bonobos,
bonobos, right.
but is there any other species that has evolved to enjoy it?
I've heard evolutionists say before that most organisms organisms must enjoy sex at some level, otherwise it probably wouldn't happen. So even if to the outside we're watching sexual displays, it doesn't look like they're enjoying. There's absolutely no way to really understand the emotional state of an organism during sex.
If we can reframe it in terms of animals that have sex for non-reproductive purposes.
Yes, sure.
Right?
Perfect.
So animals that have sex when the female's not ovulating can't possibly get pregnant. That's very few. I defer to your knowledge in this, but my understanding would be it's humans, bonobos, chimpanzees, to some extent, and dolphins. And that's it. So this is something that's interesting when we talk about animalistic sex. You know, a lot of times when I give a presentation, for example, and I talk about how hypercharged humans are, sometimes people will say, well, you know, you make us sound like animals. No, animals only have sex for reproductive purposes, with these few exceptions we've mentioned. In fact, animals would look at us having sex all the time when the females are, you know, they're lactating, they're menstruating, they're postmenopausal, you know, we're having sex in all sorts of ways that can't possibly lead to conception. Animals would look at us and say, you guys are, you know, crazy. You're the animals. Yeah, what's with all the sex, you human beings?
So my dog has had certain parts of his anatomy removed, and I would venture to guess he has not thought about sex once in his entire life. Because it just doesn't fit in anymore. And so yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, humans are the only animals that would have a talk show about sex.
Yeah, that's true. I think this is one of the only talk shows that would not only have a conversation about animal sex, but then would lead to a conversation about drones, which we're going to do in just a minute.
Sorry to just interject this. It's about the females, by the way, because the males are horny all the time in most species. Right? But it's the females who aren't available unless they're ovulating. So the human female is uniquely prepared for sex.
So how can we use the mating rituals of these animals and these different species to kind of explain to people how evolution works, right? So, and not only that, but you know, whenever it comes to the issue of gay marriage, for instance, or gay sex, there's this argument that it's unnatural, but we have animals throughout the animal kingdom that have same sex, or they mate with the same sex. So how can we utilize that information to convince people that evolution is real and that certain behaviors within humans, within the human race, is completely natural?
I would just say the fundamental fact that needs to be understood is that in human beings and these few other species we've talked about, sex is not about reproduction. It's about establishing and maintaining intimacy, social bonds, networking. So once you understand that, same-sex interaction makes as much sense as opposite-sex interaction.
But you do see same-sex interaction in most species. I think across the board, when you're talking about organisms that have different sexes, right? When you're talking about organisms that can be clearly defined as male or female, you often see examples of same-sex interaction, and sometimes it's because of a pressure situation because there aren't enough of one gender available, and sometimes it's the actual structure within that species. You know, you see there's a species of lemur that live in Madagascar where the female lemurs will mate with the male lemurs, become impregnated, and then move away from where the males are, and the females will just raise the children together, and they will have consensual lesbian sex amongst their group for the rest of their lives. This is an interesting and exciting thing for them to do. And I think the issue is that we have to be careful about our wording always. Just like earlier when you asked about sex for pleasure and you kind of said, no, let's not talk about whether it's sex for pleasure. Let's talk about whether it's sex for non-reproductive purposes. I think the same thing when we talk about what's natural and what's normal. And I think a lot of people confuse those two terms, and I think a lot of people put undue valence on those terms. So for something to be natural means that it occurs in nature. Well, gay sex occurs all the time in nature, all the time. For something to be normal means that there's some sort of measure of central tendency. The majority of the population does it. No, gay sex is not normal in nature, nor is it normal in the human population. That doesn't mean it's bad. There's no emotional valence on that, but it's something like 10% of the population.
But it is normal in some species, even using that definition, like the lemurs or the mountain goats, where a male mounting another male is so normal that if a male doesn't do it, the biologists say he's gay.
That's amazing.
You know?
Yeah.
And we see it in domestic animals all the time. How many times have you seen a male dog
hump another male dog?
It doesn't even matter.
Well, or hump a sofa.
Exactly.
You know, we're talking about ducks. I gave this TED talk. The guy who gave the talk just before me was talking about duck necrophilia. and he had all these slides about, he won the Ig Nobel Award.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm Ana Kasparian. You guys can check me out on theyoungturks.com Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And please go ahead and comment, subscribe. We want to hear from you guys. We love reading your comments. And with that said, have an excellent week. We'll see you next week with another episode of The Point.